He thought a $3,000 suit could buy him respect, until the Prince of Darkness set his coffee down and stood. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, then hit subscribe to Voices of Darkness if you believe real power is kindness in steel-toed boots. Let's begin. Los Angeles did what Los Angeles always does at 4 in the afternoon. It leaned against its own light. On Robertson, the traffic hummed like an amplifier idling between songs. Inside the Ivy Cafe, cups clinked, sugar spilled, and a barista's steam wand hissed like a cat in a sunbeam. The window tables were the prize. The rest were merely respectable. Brandon took the window without asking. The glass carried his reflection like a mirror that knew better. He adjusted the gold cufflinks, tiny mosaics of order and money, then pulled his phone from his pocket as if the rest of the world were pressed flowers inside it. He didn't look at the waitress who came to him smiling. Why would he? When you're 23 and the air part's for you, gratitude feels like a hobby for slower people. Espresso, he said, never lifting his eyes. I'm in a hurry, her name tag said Sarah in blue script. The script was brave. The letters had fought their way through long nights and small tips. She nodded, still smiling. Because anyone who has worked for long enough at the edge of other people's hunger learns to make courtesy a habit that survives weather. In the back corner, a man in round sunglasses cupped a small white demitasse in both hands. His rings looked like family crests for wolves, but his wrists were thread-thin, an older man's wrists. He watched without staring. He listened without leaning in. He was Ozzy Osbourne, and he had seen empires of noise crumble into one quiet apology that made a man new. The espresso arrived riding a small saucer. Sarah carried it carefully the way you carry anything brittle near someone who doesn't look up. She set it down. Enjoy, she said. Brandon decided he would. He decided he would enjoy everything. He stretched his polished Italian loafers onto the table he hadn't paid for yet, soles smearing faint street dust across the wood she had just wiped. The act was not dramatic. It was casual in the way cruelty often is, thoughtless, gravity-free. A stranger coughed. A couple glanced. A busboy slowed. Sarah blinked at the shoes, the phone, the man behind them. She breathed in. She breathed out. May I clean your table, sir? She asked a few minutes later, returning with a cloth. Clean around them, Brandon said, not moving the shoes. I'm in a hurry. Outside, sunlight shifted on chrome. Inside, the cafe grew very quiet the way rooms do when dignity is being tested. The barista lowered the steam. Cutlery paused mid-air. Time seemed to step back 1/2 pace and fold its arms. Ozzy set down his cup. He stood the way old trees rise in wind. Slow, inevitable. His steps were unhurried and very certain. Whispered recognition passed like a current. Is that? It looks like. No way. It's him. Ozzy stopped at the table and let the silence stay. Silence does heavy lifting if you let it. He watched the phone, the shoes, the young man's unweathered face. Parkinson's tapped its quiet tattoo in his fingers, but only he heard it. What the room saw was steadiness, an ocean on a day with a long, long horizon. Excuse me, son, he said softly, British vowels shaped by gravel roads. I think we've got a problem here. Brandon looked up, eyebrows hitching. The lenses caught a flicker of himself, then the stranger beyond. A problem? He said. Who are you? Ozzy smiled the way some people put down a heavy case after a long walk. Who am I? He said gently. Just a man trying to enjoy his coffee. Same as you. Only difference is I don't put my feet on the table while someone's trying to do her job. The words were simple. They didn't shout. They landed like coins in a jar that had been waiting years to be heard. Brandon squinted, eyes narrowing with the strange stress of being told he'd been seen. The cafe held its breath. Somewhere far away, a car horn tested a note and moved on. Look, old man, he said, voice sharpening to hide the tremor. It's my table. I'll do what I want. Ozzy tilted his head as if to better hear the heart trying to speak behind the mouth. It is your table, he agreed, for the next half hour. But the people around it, this cafe, this young woman, they're not furniture. Respect doesn't slow you down, son. It keeps you from making a fool of yourself. A murmur rode the room. Sarah stood with the cloth folded in her hand like a small flag she didn't want to raise. Who even are you? Brandon demanded. My name's Ozzy Osbourne, he said lightly, almost apologetically, as if saying he was reluctantly responsible for a mess the wind had made. I used to sing in a little band called Black Sabbath. Cameras were phones now. Phones were cameras. 2 hands lifted. A busboy's mouth opened. Sarah's eyes went wide because sometimes life reaches into your day and taps you on the shoulder with a ringed finger. Brandon's posture faltered. It wasn't the fame that did it. It was the way the old man's calm made the room feel like a church where the sermon was not anger but memory. "When I was your age," Ozzy said, still soft, "I once climbed into a limousine after a show. Thousands of people screaming an hour earlier. Thought I was the center of the map. Told the driver to hurry. Snapped at him like he was a wall clock late for me. He didn't say a word. Drove me clean and steady, like a man who'd seen every kind of night." He glanced toward the window, and you could tell he was seeing a street that wasn't there anymore. Outside the hotel, he turned to me and said, "Mr. Osbourne, I've got a family. Hopes and a bad knee. I don't rush lights for anyone's applause." I still hear him. That man drove me farther in one sentence than the limo did all year. He looked at the shoes on the table. He waited until waiting finished its work. And then, gently, merely suggesting the shape of dignity, he nodded at the polished leather. "Off, please." Brandon blinked. The word please rang like a bell. He swung his legs down. The sound they made finding the floor was too loud for what it was, like guilt inventing an echo. "There you go," Ozzy said, and the kindness in it hurt more than scolding would have. The room exhaled. A fork touched down. The espresso machine sighed. "What's your name, love?" Ozzy asked, turning to Sarah. "Sarah," she said. Then, because something about him made truth easy, "Sarah Rodriguez." "Sarah," he said, "you're a professional. You kept your grace under a thing that didn't deserve it. That's harder than any song I've sung." Her mouth trembled. People talk about the big moments, the lights, the ovations, but sometimes the greatest ovation is one pair of eyes telling you you're seen. Brandon stared at the groove his cup had left in the saucer. A heat moved through him that wasn't pride and wasn't shame exactly, but the friction when the two scrape at each other. "You owe her an apology," Ozzy said, not as a judge but as a physician writing a prescription. Brandon stood, thinner inside the suit than he'd felt 15 minutes ago. "Sarah," he said, and it wasn't smooth. He kept stalling on the simplest words, the way people do when they finally mean them. "I was awful. You were doing your job and I made it harder. I'm sorry." Sarah nodded. "Thank you," she said. She didn't say it's okay. She said thank you. Forgiveness is not a rug. You don't use it to hide the dust. You open the window and let both people breathe. "Espressos for both of us, please," Ozzy added. "On me." Sarah smiled through eyes that were shiny and not ashamed of it. "Right away," she said, and moved. Ozzy returned to his corner table because a lesson isn't a leash. It's a coat you leave on a chair and hope the other person tries on. Here is what the couple by the window said to each other that evening when they went home. "We saw a man teach without humiliating. It can be done." Here is what the barista said to his roommate. He didn't raise his voice. He raised the room. Here is what the busboy texted his sister. "If someone talks down to you, you don't have to get small. You can let time do the heavy lifting and then say, 'Off the table.' Please." Here is what Sarah put in her pocket. "Cash, yes." And a tip from the corner table that felt like a poem, but also a sentence still warm. "You're a professional." She would touch that sentence the way some people touch a locket. And Brandon, he stared at the espresso and saw for the first time how light lives in bitter things. His father had built towers. Real estate men don't cry easily. Cement has a long memory. When Brandon had been 13 and scored his first designer watch, his father had said, "Son, the thing you wear won't tell me who you are. The thing you do when nobody's clapping will." It had sounded like dryness to a desert that didn't know it was thirsty. He reached for his phone now, not to post, not to flare, but to scroll through contacts until he found a name he scrolled past too often. Marta, housekeeping. She had worked in their building for years, always invisible because she wore a key ring instead of a logo. He typed, "Thank you for always being kind to my mother when she's in the lobby." I've never said it. I'm saying it now. He didn't hit send. He let the words sit and stare back at him. Then he hit send. Sarah returned with 2 espressos. One at the corner table, one at the window. She set the second one down and waited. Good servers don't hover, but they don't flee either. They wait as if the table might say something important. "Thank you, Sarah," Brandon said, and the "you" was the weight-bearing word. "You're welcome," she answered, and the room believed both of them. Ozzy lifted his cup to the light, amber brown with a single crescent of crema like a moon in a dark sky. He sipped. He smiled because time is a kind instructor if you survive the curriculum. He looked at Brandon, and Brandon looked back. They nodded like musicians who recognize a chord in each other. Ozzy stood and moved toward the register. Parkinson's drummed a light patter, rain on a tent, but his gait was steady, a boat finding the dock it knows by smell. "You're an amazing person, Sarah," he said as he passed. "Don't ever forget that." "So are you, Mr. Osbourne," she replied. He shook his head. "I'm just loud," he said. "You're sturdy." On the sidewalk, the city breathed in warm plaster and jacaranda shade. Ozzy tugged his jacket closed against a breeze only he seemed to feel. He paused, hand on the door, and the brass handle cooled under his ring as an older clip from his life played, unspooling in the projector of his mind, the limo driver's voice again. Then another scene, a hotel maid in Milwaukee who had left a folded note on a pillow that read, "Sleep well. Mr. Osbourne, I hope the music in your head lets you rest tonight." He had tipped well that afternoon because he could. He had called down to thank her because that's what mattered. 30 years later, he could still see her shoes, white rubber turning gray at the edges, and the way she had said on the phone, "You're welcome, sir," as if she had never been thanked for anything bigger than a towel exchange. These memories were not trophies on a shelf. They were stitches in a coat that kept him warm from the inside. He stepped into the late day. Inside, life arranged itself around a new center of gravity. Brandon lifted his feet and kept them where wood becomes floor. A young boy at a nearby table whispered to his mother, "Is he the one who bit a bat?" And the mother whispered back, "He's the one who learned from it." Brandon stood. He walked to the counter where Sarah was counting change into someone else's hand. "Sarah," he said quietly, I'd like to pay for table 6 and table in the corner if he hasn't already." "He has," she said with a smile. "Okay," he nodded. "Then whoever's next. And if you have a tip pool, could I?" "You can," she said and slid the jar toward him. He took out his wallet. His hands did not tremble. They weren't that brave. They were simply careful, which is a kind of bravery that doesn't get songs but keeps households alive. He placed bills in the jar. When money is apology, it looks different. It lands softer. A man near the pastry case clapped once quietly, once just enough to break and bless the silence. Nobody joined in because this wasn't a performance. It was a repair. That evening, Sarah took 2 buses home. On the second bus, a woman with a grocery bag fell asleep with her head against the window, and the groceries listed slowly to the floor, apples rolling like small moons. Sarah caught the bag in time. The woman startled awake and smiled in the gluey way people smile when their day has been long, and their night has not yet consented to begin. "Thank you," she said, and Sarah heard her own voice answering, "You're welcome." She thought of Ozzy's sentence, "You're a professional." She thought of Brandon's halting apology. She imagined them as 2 notes that, played together, make a chord that belongs to a better song than the one she had started the day humming. She stepped off at her stop. The sky above East Hollywood had the bruised peach color of fruit you'll cut around and still eat. She unlocked her apartment, kissed her sleeping dog on the forehead, and left her tips on the counter in a neat pile that looked like self-respect. When she closed her eyes that night, the world didn't spin faster. It spun kinder. Brandon stood in the parking lot watching a swallow cut the air into pieces and sew it back together. He called his father, and the phone rang 2 times longer than it should have because the space between rings is where we measure what we mean. "Son," his father answered. A buzz of boardroom, the sound of paper being told what to do. "I was a jerk today," Brandon said. Honesty removed the stage lights. "At a café." "To a waitress. In front of Ozzy Osbourne." Silence. Then a laugh, but not the kind that shrinks you. The kind that says, "Welcome to the species." "I've been a jerk to waiters in front of lesser legends," his father said. "What did you do about it?" "I apologized," Brandon said. "I meant it. I think I meant it for a lot of other days, too." "Good," the older man said. Paper stopped moving. "Bring your mother flowers. And tomorrow go back to that cafe and say thank you again. Habit needs rehearsal." "Okay," Brandon said. "Proud of you." his father added and hung up before the pride could get awkward. Brandon exhaled. He did not feel like a better man. He felt like a man who had finally located the door. The next afternoon, Brandon returned to the Ivy Café. No suit. No Rolex. He wore a shirt he liked because it made room for his shoulders to drop. He waited in line. When it was his turn, he said, "Hi," and it sounded like a word asking for nothing and offering presents. Sarah was on shift. She smiled without surprise, which is to say, like a person who has learned that life repeats not to annoy you, but to allow you another chance. "Double espresso?" she guessed. "Please," he said, and the please was bigger than 2 syllables. He left an envelope by the register with her name on it. Inside were 2 movie tickets and a note, "For you and whoever you want to sit next to in the dark. Thanks for being a pro." There was also a printed resume for a friend of his, Camila, who had been looking for a job and might be a good fit for weekend hostess work. On the back of the resume he had written, "No pressure, only if you're hiring. Thought I'd pass it on because you once smiled at me when I didn't deserve it." Sarah didn't open the envelope until her break. When she did, she laughed and wiped at her eyes with the corner of a napkin, because tenderness makes a mess. A week later, a postcard arrived at the cafe. It showed a foggy English village with a pub that claimed to be older than most ideas. On the back was a scrawl that looked like it had wrestled a pen. "To the Ivy crew. Keep the coffee strong and the kindness stronger. Love, O." Sarah tacked it to the corkboard near the staff room. People took photos of it and sent those photos to friends who didn't need to know the cafe in order to understand a blessing. Ozzy sat in his garden in Hancock Park at a table that had learned his elbows. Sharon had placed a bowl of cherries there that morning. He ate one slow and spit the pit into his hand like a boy at a schoolyard, delighted to still be able to aim. A hummingbird strafed a flower. Somewhere a siren did what sirens do. He thought about the boy in the Gucci suit, about the girl with a cloth folded like a flag, about the way dignity is quiet and therefore hard to film. He thought about the limo driver, the hotel maid, the note about music and sleep. He thought about every person he had been and the people who had forgiven him, despite strong reasons not to. He chewed another cherry and smiled. The garden held him up. The day, which had not asked for anything yet, let him keep it. Stories want a drum roll. Real life prefers the gentle click of a door opening and closing without complaint. Brandon did not turn into a saint. He was kinder, and then he forgot, and then he remembered. And on some days he bought coffees for people waiting behind him because habit, as his father had said, needs rehearsal. Sarah did not become rich. She became steadier. She laughed more. She finished a community college class at night called Interpersonal Communications and found that she already knew half of it from serving breakfast to strangers. She got a small raise. She called her mother and said, "I love my job today," and meant it without embarrassment. The Ivy Café remained what it had always been, a place where the city staged conversations between people who didn't know they were neighbors. As for Ozzy, he kept doing what older men who have seen the show and the teardown do. He told the truth as kindly as he could manage and left rooms a little quieter than he found them, which is another way to say he left them ready for music. On a different afternoon, months later, Brandon saw a man bark at a bus driver whose only crime was the timetable. The anger was small, the volume large. Brandon walked over, voice level. "Off the table, please," he said. The man blinked, confused. There was no table. Brandon smiled. "Sorry," he said. "Old line I learned somewhere. I just mean, give the guy a break." The bus driver nodded once. A little bow men make to each other when a shift is ending and the city hasn't broken them that day. The angry man backed away, sheepish. The bus wheezed and carried a story into a street that had time for it. Brandon sat on a bench and texted Sarah. Felt like doing the right thing today. Espresso later. She replied with a coffee cup emoji and a star. Small things, yes. But the world runs on small things. Engines don't need applause. They need oil. If this story reached you, if some part of you has ever stretched your feet onto someone else's table or wiped around them because you didn't think you had a choice, let this be your reminder. Respect is the cheapest power you'll ever own, and the only kind that earns interest. This is Voices of Darkness, where legends are loud and humanity is louder. Before you go, tell us in the comments, do you think Brandon truly changed after that day? What would you have done in Ozzy's place? If you love Ozzy Osbourne, prove your love Share this video, like, and subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Let's carry this story into someone's afternoon and make it warmer than it would have been without us.